All right. Welcome, everyone. And thank you so much for being here with us for session 3 of our MVP User Stories series. I'm Chelsea Treseder, one of the co-founders of My Vitals Pro, and I'm here with my teammate, Kate Zerker. And we are thrilled to have you with us today. When we launched this series, our goal was simple. We wanted to create a place where real MVP users can share what's working, what's changing, and how data is helping them move their practices forward. And one of my favorite parts of building MVP has been really just hearing and learning about the ingenuity that happens inside actual clinics. So, workflows that have been optimized, small adjustments that managers have made that make a really big impact, and just all the different ways that data can help practice managers, leaders, consultants, owners anticipate challenges and really unlock new opportunities. So those are the conversations where I know I personally learn the most, and that's exactly what has inspired this series that we are doing. So instead of just me talking for 1 hour, which we've all heard plenty of in the past, these sessions are really designed to highlight the collective expertise that we've built across the MVP community. And I think when we share that, it really levels everyone up, which is really at the heart of our mission here at MVP, which is to fortify private practices to thrive despite any headwinds that may come their way. So I am absolutely thrilled today to be joined by 3 amazing MVP users. They are Sarah Roggenbuck, Jim Vogrin, and Leslie Pearson. I'm going to introduce them each in more detail, kind of right before they each have a chance to share their knowledge and wisdom with us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions or anything you need to contact us about during the presentation, you can use the Q&A feature. We will definitely be leaving time at the end to answer any questions you may have. So as you think of them as the presenters are speaking, just go ahead and drop them in and we will make sure to get to them at the end. So as I look at who's joined us today, I see a lot of familiar names, a lot of existing MVP users. So hi, thank you guys for being here. I also see a handful of people who are not current users of MVP. So for those of you who don't use MVP today, I wanted to spend just a minute to explain what MVP is and what it delivers to practice owners and managers. So MVP is the audiology industry's business intelligence platform. It's built to do a number of things that you'll see up on the screen here. I think, kind of from a really high level, it's meant to help you as, again, practice owner, manager, consultant, make better decisions faster. When you have access to near real-time data that's delivered to you in an insightful way, it allows you to make decisions very confidently in the moment that are going to help move you closer to your goals. When you have automated delivery of your KPIs and analytics, you're going to save tons of time in terms of manual work that historically had to been done to understand these elements of your business. Not to mention, you have access to really sophisticated, robust KPIs that simply can't be calculated manually or using a spreadsheet. When you're looking at your data in this way, you're going to be able to understand both issues and opportunities earlier than you would have otherwise. You're going to be able to see how you stack up to practices who are similar to yours. You're going to be able to see today where you're headed in the future so that it's not a surprise when you get there. You know today what you need to do in order to achieve your goals and get where you're trying to go. And really, a lot of it does come down to just that confidence and clarity that you need to perform at your highest level as a leader. Not going to do a demo or anything because, again, I know a lot of you are currently using MVP, but wanted to pop a number of our features up here today, a lot of which you're actually going to see today when our wonderful guest speakers are talking about them. So again, I won't go into a ton of detail, but I'll just mention a few things of kind of how MVP delivers those values I just mentioned. But we are able to forecast and project your future performance. We're able to really deeply understand how patients flow in the journey through your practice. We're able to help you set goals or take the goals that you've already set for yourself and present them back to you so that you and your team understand how you're doing on a daily basis, able to get you really deep analytics into the hearing aid aspects of your business, insights into how your marketing and referral sources are performing, understanding the potential in opportunity base in your existing database. Like I mentioned, being able to view how your practice performs in real time, up to the minute, compared to practices not only across the country, but in your region. And then, of course, helping you understand really how you perform in your greater market overall. So just a quick overview of the features of MVP. You're going to see a bunch of them today. With that, I'm Really excited to introduce our first presenter, who is Sarah Roggenbuck. She is the co-owner of Bieri Hearing Specialists, which is a very long-standing private practice with five locations, across Michigan's Great Lakes Bay region. She has nearly 20 years of experience in hearing healthcare, coming from both clinical expertise as well as a strong understanding of business operations and patient-centered growth. She started her career in clinical care and then spent almost a decade on the manufacturing side, supporting practices across the Midwest. And that experience has given her a really unique, big picture perspective on what can make private practices thrive. In 2023, she and her business partner, Dr. Melissa Menzies, acquired Bieri Hearing Specialists, which I know she's going to share with us a little bit about today. And they have been working for the last few years to really modernize the practice with a focus on culture, team development, and data-driven decision making. She is also a frequent speaker on practice growth, leadership, and navigating today's managed care environment. So, with that, I am going to turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Chelsea. Can you hear me okay?
You sound great.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm really excited to be here today and to talk to you a little bit about Bieri Hearing Specialists and our journey to get here today. So, Bieri Hearing Specialists was founded actually 73 years ago, and it was founded by Gottlieb Bieri. His parents went to the School of the Deaf and they met there, and he felt there was such a calling in the community for people like his parents who were underserved. So, that's the foundation of Bieri Hearing Specialists. Then ultimately, his daughter came to run the practice, Catherine Bieri Ryan, in the 80s, and she was the true visionary. She made it to the 5 locations that we have today across mid-Michigan, and she really was the heart and soul of the company. Now, I was a manufacturer rep for about a decade, so I had the privilege of becoming their rep, and that's how I got to know the wonderful people here. Unfortunately, Kathy became really ill, and I was visiting Bieri, and I said, how's Kathy doing? And the staff said, why don't you buy the place? And I was like, I laughed and I thought about it for a little bit, and then I was like, why don't I? And so that evening I called Kathy and I said, hey, Kathy, I just want to throw my hat in the ring. If you're interested in selling, I'd be honored if you would consider me. I didn't hear from her for months, and then I get a call and she says, are you still interested? And I said, absolutely. And she said, well, I would really like you and Dr. Melissa Menzies to carry on my family's legacy. I said, we would be honored. So we agreed to do so. And then unfortunately, she passed away just 6 days later. So 6 days does not give you a lot of time, especially when it's somebody's end of life, to make plans, to ask questions. That simply wasn't the case. So we had several month period where there was no leadership. And quite frankly, a lot of her secrets of what Bieri was and where it was going and how it was founded, I couldn't ask any questions. And she was relatively private about those things. So imagine coming to own this legacy company, 5 locations, multiple team members, and now it's yours. Now what? And so, truth be told, I had a wonderful friend say, hey, you've got to learn about MVP. And so, prior to acquiring the practice, Melissa and I were in touch with Chelsea and Will. And I will tell you that is one of the very first things that we did when we became the owners is we integrated our system with MVP. And I can just remember early on, I remember having my coffee cup at 6 a.m., waiting for the refresh to happen every morning, going, what happened yesterday? What happened? And that's really where it came into our love for MVP. And so, the thing we did have, which was a rich history of data. And I think that data, as they say, numbers don't lie, right? So we really had to rely on that data heavily to determine what our course was for ownership. So I just wanted to share a few of the things that we were doing initially that really struck out at us because, as you can imagine, there was a lot to tackle, but what do you do first? So I know Kate's going to pull up MVP here. And now this isn't our numbers, this is ABC hearing. But what I wanted to show you was something that became really evident for us early on. So if we go into KPI Center, this is probably one of my favorite tabs. My business partner, Melissa, would probably say I go into the weeds with this, and she'll say, "Give me the clip notes, Sarah, give me the clip notes," because I love to run through this system here. But if we go into the table view, Kate, then what we'll see is something that became really blatantly obvious for me early on is there was a big discrepancy within the company. And as I was researching and understanding and pulling reports, we had a really big discrepancy between payments and revenue. And I just couldn't make sense of that initially. And so obviously, I went on a fact-finding mission amongst the team. And come to find out, the policy and the procedure had always been that patients did not pay for their devices until 60 days in. So no money until 60 days, which my response was, we are not the Bank of Bieri. We cannot do that. We need for our cash flow situation, we need to change that. And that was an immediate change, which really helped us initially to stabilize our cash flow. So had it not been for this tool, I may not have caught that on right away. Another thing to consider is if we click on the TPA, we are in a really high area of third parties. Michigan is, I don't want to say the most because I don't know that for sure, but I would say one of the most heavily weighted for TPAs. And so my thought was TPAs have to make sense to keep doing them. So I need to understand how that works. And so something that became blatantly obvious again was there was a rather big discrepancy between TPA units versus TPA revenue. Now, I'm a firm believer if I'm going to ask my staff to get behind something and do something, we have to understand why. And it wasn't shared before for whatever reason in terms of the numbers of what was going on in the business. And I felt like, how do I direct without showing? And so when staff is saying, I'm working so hard, I'm seeing so many extra patients, and I'm saying, we're not seeing the revenue, to show them the factual numbers, the discrepancy between the two, that was really huge to be able to show them, yes, it's this percentage of units, but it's this percentage of revenue. We have to look at it differently. And so, maybe it's just a receiver, maybe it's just a dome, maybe we can't do that. We can't just give everything away because, in essence, that's stealing from the business. I hate to be that dramatic about it, but it's true. And so we really started to formulate some ideas of how, whether it's additional services or a fee schedule, and we really went into policy mode to figure out how that would make sense. And another tool you'll see down here at the bottom, the graph here, I love running this report. So where it says TPA percent versus revenue per hour. We know there's a direct correlation. If there's a higher TPA percentage, it's a lower revenue per hour. So how do we balance that out and how do we watch that? And that's what we did is we implemented procedures to make sure that we were driving up that revenue per hour. And what I love about that is as you implement new procedures, you can monitor it because you can check and select that specific item. We have 5 locations, so I can look per location, per provider, and maybe it's not going as well at a location, which will then let you have a very pointed conversation and make sure that there's not this much misunderstanding. And much like Chelsea was saying, you can catch it when it's small so that it doesn't become that snowball effect. So that's something I've really appreciated about the MVP. Now, another tab here is patient flow. I am in here constantly. So I love that you can select a period. I like to focus on usually, like maybe the next 22 days, or you can do whatever formula you'd like to have. But I love this because this really lets me see what's ahead, what is in the pipeline. And I like when we click on sales opportunities. I appreciate that it lets me see how many for us, and this is another really great thing about MVP. what makes sense for our business? And Will and Chelsea work so well with you to make sure that this is a tool that works well for your business. And so for us, I said, oh, I would love to see my private pay evals and I would love to see my private pay fittings because for us, it doesn't hit the books until it's fit. And so this tool and their flexibility allowed this to be a really worthwhile tool. So I can be proactive rather than reactive. So I love that. Other things that they've done to really customize MVP to work for us is we're kind of an anomaly here. We work on a fiscal year. And so Will and Chelsea were able to create MVP so I can view it not only by calendar year, but by fiscal year. And I'm ridiculous. I like to be checking, check and balance. So I like to see, oh, where are we at calendar year wise? Oh, now let's check fiscal year. And so again, they're just so flexible and willing to work with you. Another great tool that they did within MVP is they created a forum where for a commission structure for our audiologists, they have a specific login where they can see in live time where they're at and how things are going for their commission for the month. To be honest, when we started and took over Bieri, the commission structure was so convoluted, I still don't understand how it worked. So they helped us create a program that was easy to use, easy to understand, and automatic for our audiologists to check out. So, as I think back to working with MVP, I think about the fact that they've really provided me the tools to be able to lead along with Melissa, and we were able to take it into bite-sized pieces. So, our objectives are 3 initiatives, 3 months at a time, and all of these initiatives are measurable. And this MVP is a tool that allows us to show our team, is this something we should keep doing, stop doing, start doing? It really takes away the biases because I think we all have biases, right? Where we think, oh, yeah, things are going well, but this is numbers don't lie. And I love that because it's created a system for goals for our team. It's allowed us to have a yearly goal, a monthly goal for each office, and our team is really motivated to meet those goals. And I think the best part is the goals are attainable. I um I know that at times it feels like there's a moving goalpost of where those goals are, whereas this is all data driven. So, it's not something I'm making up. It's supported by the evidence, which is our data. Now, one thing I want to quickly mention is there's a patient list generator feature, which I think is going to be rolled out soon. We were
Like
early beta
tomorrow.
tester. Oh,
Yeah.
tomorrow. Hey,
Yeah.
spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's great.
but I just have to tell you guys, this has been so fun to play with in the clinic because it's by turning a few knobs, you can get any data that you want to get, and it's in usable, it's applicable. So when you want to generate a list, it allows you to have whether you want to mail people, you can select that, whether you want to email them, whether you want to call them. So stay tuned. I think you all will love this feature that we've been working with in the future here. So, in closing, I don't want to take any more time other to say we simply could not be where we are at today without the support of Will, Chelsea, Kate, the whole team at MVP, and the tool that this has provided us. So, thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Appreciate it. Okay, let me get my screen back and shared here. Can you guys see it okay?
Looks
Yeah.
great.
Okay. Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thanks for that, Sarah. That was such an interesting and very cool story. So I appreciate that. And I am really excited to welcome our next speaker, who is Jim Vogrin. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Johnson Audiology and also the CEO of Sage Consulting. And he has more than a decade of experience in our industry. He's worked with over 500 practices and 1,000 practitioners, helping them strengthen their operations, understand numbers, and drive sustainable growth. He specializes in translating P&Ls, KPIs, marketing data, and practice valuations, and turning those into clear, actionable insights. He's known for delivering customized analyses and practical recommendations that improve both patient care and business performance. At Johnson Audiology, Jim partners with his team to optimize processes and enhance outcomes across their locations in Tennessee and Georgia. He holds a BA in marketing from John Carroll University and completed the Business Essentials for Executive program at Wharton. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. I appreciate it. Great job, Sarah. Sarah, interestingly enough, was the very first manufacturer rep I ever met when I started at Elite quite a while ago. So,
Love that.
really cool story and fun to see you again. As Chelsea said, I work with Johnson Audiology. Johnson Audiology was founded in 2009 by Dr. Megan Johnson, and now we have 5 locations in Tennessee and Georgia. And we have about 35 employees and 13 audiologists. So I love MVP because it allows me to see generally about the business and the company as a whole, but also really can look at each individual clinic, each individual audiologist, and really understand, key areas for us to look at and try to improve upon. So what I'm going to do today is share how I use MVP on a daily basis, and then also how I use it to interact with our audiologists and share information with them. Okay, so on the home screen, I think we're all familiar with this, right? We're going to be looking at, how our week's going, how our month, quarter, and year's going. Um, really, we use Counselier. So for me, Counselier shows revenue that's basically booked, even out into the future. So there's always a slight forecast in there for me to kind of understand how we're going for the individual month. But I still love looking at the monthly forecast and then most importantly, the annual forecast. So that when we set our goals at the beginning of the year, we kind of see, how we're doing to be on track with all of those. But I think the home screen is pretty familiar for everyone. Patient flow, as Sarah said, it's really, really cool. And there's a lot of different areas that we can actually get into. The part that I love the best is the graph in the bottom right, which was introduced at the beginning of this year. And so in this, the purple line graph shows your pipeline, whereas the green graph shows your units. And so it's amazing how accurate the pipeline is to your actual units sold. So, here last March, we can see we had a really good pipeline. Correspondingly, in May, we had really good sales. July, we dip in pipeline, and we're lower at the end of August. And so the key though is MVP is great data, but the important thing is how do we use that data then to make decisions that we can implement for the business. So, for instance, if we're looking at our pipeline, it's been below our 6 month average for quite a while now. Our units have been pretty good though, so like that's wonderful. We like to see units above our pipeline. That means we're performing pretty well. But if I'm looking here in, late October, early November, and my pipeline is trailing off, this is an area where I may say, okay, how can we do something at this time of the year to increase our pipeline moving forward, right? So maybe we decide, hey, we're coming out of Thanksgiving. Maybe we put a mailer together, mid November that's going to drop, this week, right after Thanksgiving to say, hey, everyone, if you missed out on any amazing times during, Thanksgiving, let's try to do something different and have you in so that you don't miss the same kind of things in Christmas and New Year's. Something like that where we're using this data to say, okay, how can we change the current pathway by doing something a little different? The other thing I like to look at is reviewing our pipeline opportunities. So if I look at my overall pipeline here, again, it's lower than where I want it to be, but there's two different types of opportunities. So my open opportunities are opportunities that somebody came in, they saw us, but they didn't buy, but they're still on a schedule for us. So it's an open opportunity. Whereas my future opportunities are brand new patients that are coming in that have a potential opportunity. So this is now somewhere where we need to focus, hey, what are we doing and what can we do differently to increase our future opportunities to really get that much higher up on the pipeline. And so now we know more specifically really where we should target with our marketing efforts to try to get that pipeline back up to where we want it to be. Just like Sarah, I love the KPI center. I can spend so much time going through all the different areas. We're going to look at revenue, and I think probably most of you, would look at your individual, revenue by provider. So we're going to kind of stack rank, how we're doing there and where we are as far as performance for all of them. We're going to do the same thing looking at ASP, right? We want to understand, who's selling at what sales price levels. And in this is again ABC company that Sarah and Kate were showing. We have Jennifer at $2,900. We go down the other way where we have some really low. So in this case, I don't know the providers. Maybe that's an audiology assistant or something that has less revenue opportunities, but there's still a pretty big discrepancy in ASP. And so we're going to understand that. We're going to look at, maybe their tech level for hearing aids that they're selling. We're going to have conversations as far as, maybe what's contributing to their ASP and some of the differences there. I always look at opportunities and new patient appointments, right? Because those are important. We want to know, what's out there, how many opportunities we've had, how we compare to last year, in regard to opportunities and new patients. And we always like to see green. That's kind of like the happy place. So like when we see green, like that's cool. So in this case, this is really, really good. Also on the right-hand side, look at by clinic so I can understand how the clinics are doing compared to last year, as well as providers. In sales, I look at two different things on this page. I like to see where my revenue is actually coming from. So traditionally in a hearing aid practice, typically we see about 65% of sales coming from new patients and 35 coming from existing patients. Now, more established a practice like this that's over $6 million in sales, maybe we'll see it closer to 50-50. But even in this case, we have way more existing patients this year than what I would say would be normal. So again, this goes back to, all right, what are we doing with our pipeline? How are we getting new patients? And how are we getting revenue with those folks? The other thing I really like to look at is ASP for our first time hearing aid purchasers and then our upgrade hearing aid purchasers. So somebody who's already bought hearing aids in the past, buying them for the second or third time. We like to see a difference here, of this is almost $200, maybe $200 to $250. And the reason I say that is because one, they've had success already, right? So they know hearing aids are helpful, they're changing their lives, they're impactful. But there's also a trust and credibility that's been established with our audiologists that they're more open to having just real honest conversations as far as how they can perform even better. So we usually see this upgrade ASP a little higher. So that's something that's really, really good. Now, to me, the most important single KPI metric for a practice is conversion percentage. So we're going to go into conversion percentage. We're going to understand, how our different providers are doing, right? We're gonna compare maybe, the top three there to our top three in revenue and understand, what's driving everything. But to lay this out, maybe in the most like basic way I can. So this practice has about 2,000 opportunities a year. Okay, so let's forget this data because I'm going to use simple math. If we have a conversion percentage of 50%, that means we're helping 1,000 patients. That's wonderful, right? We're changing their lives. If our ASP is $2,500, that turns into 2.5 million. A binaural rate of 1.9 turns it into $4.75 million. Okay. Now, if we change that fictitious 50% conversion rate to 60%, right? That seems like a lot, and it is, quite frankly, it's a 20% increase, but it's also something that we can achieve over time. Now, if we have a 60% conversion rate, we've now helped 1,200 patients. That's amazing. 200 more patients that are walking out of our door that are happy and having their lives changed. If we keep the same ASP and the same binaural rate, our sales are now at 5.7 million. So we've increased our sales $1 million without seeing an additional patient, without spending one more dollar on marketing, without making one more phone call to a patient, just by improving, our conversion rate. And so to me, that's where we've spent a lot of our time in our practice and really understanding our providers' behaviors in that hearing aid evaluation. Traditionally, what I've seen is a lot of our providers like to stick to the status quo, like what they're comfortable with, right? They went through school, they probably had a mentor, they worked at their first practice, and they got into a habit of doing hearing aid evaluations, a typical way. So what we decided to do was observe their behavior and listen to their hearing aid evaluations. In our practice, we found three different ways that really there could be improvement. One was the questions they were asking patients, right? Or if they were even asking questions. But more importantly, what second level or third level questions were they asking to find out the impact? So you may say, tell me three situations where you struggle to hear. And the patient will say there's three situations: crowded restaurant, at church, and at a concert, something like that. But then what we weren't doing is saying, okay, how does that impact you? And what does that doing with your life and your loved ones and your relationships with those people. And once you start finding out that information, now we can actually start having better, deeper conversations with them. So we looked at that. We looked at how we're actually presenting solutions and how we're discussing price. And so once we had a baseline of how can we improve, now we work with them individually to say, okay, let's work on your questioning. Let's do some role play. Let's do some practicing. And audiologists typically do not like role plays. We have found that out so often this past year. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. And I always say it's like a sports team, right? If you're going out to play a game Sunday afternoon and you don't practice at all that week, you're not going to perform nearly as well as if you practice each day, you look at film, you understand what you're doing wrong, what you can do better, and then you practice to try to get better. So to me, there's no better metric to try to focus on to improve the conversion rate. Return rate, certainly we're going to look at this practice, 2.6% is wonderful, but we still want to look at each individual person to understand. And then we have our own billing team. So collection percentage is really important to us and important to them when we're looking at that. Sarah talked about managed care. This is the screen that I want to see reds if I'm in full transparency. I want to see a red here for percent of units, and I'd like to see, well, I'd like to see a green here, but a red for percentage of units. So what we're trying to do is say, hey, these folks here at 6%, they're not even worried about third party, right? They're nothing like what Sarah's going through, and to a lesser degree what we go through. But we still want to focus on what can we do to try to drive more private pay patients in. And so as this for us, this average TPA fee is getting lower and lower every single year. We want to find ways to be creative to try to drive more patients to the private pay side. And so this metric for us is really important to look at. So this is folks that have bought hearing aids before as a third party patient and now have been converted to a private pay. So we like to see green here and we like to say bigger numbers because we're doing something either we have a matching program that we do and we've implemented, but we're having conversations with patients on what truly is the best solution for them, maybe not what the best what their insurance dictates for them when they're not referred directly from a third party, obviously. On patient flow, there's a couple things I like to look at. Booking delay for us, I like to see it about 8 days because to me, like this is kind of the happy medium of, hey, we're busy enough or our schedule's full, but if a new patient calls, they're not waiting 3 or 4 weeks, to get into our clinic. But really, this is where helping to drill down by the clinic is helpful. So, when you're getting it 15 days, now you're starting to make decisions as a business owner. Do I need another audiologist or provider? Do I potentially need an audiology assistant to pull some of those patients off of their schedule so we can free them up, for new patient evaluations? So booking delay is really, really important. And then one thing that we've focused on a lot this year, in addition to improving conversion rate, is improving our companion rate. So when we click on completed appointments, it shows you your companion rate. This practice is at 0.2%. So I would say, hey guys, we're not doing something right in counsel here because we're not tracking our companions, properly. But what we want to do is understand really what our companion rate is for hearing aid evaluations. And I saw a stat, I think it was Ollie Luke that actually said it, that you have a 30% higher conversion rate when a companion is available. So this is another area now where we're focused on working with our PCCs. Are we asking for the companion when we make that first call? Are we asking if their companion's coming, on the confirmation call, the day before the appointment? So that's something that we've focused on quite a bit. On this page, I like to look at age of purchase just out of curiosity, right? We always say that the demographic of our patients is getting lower, the age is getting lower, it's changing quite a bit. But like in this practice, it's actually older than it was last year. The same thing is happening in our practice. So we say, yeah, we're driving in new, younger patients and it's wonderful. But this is kind of a reality check of, what are the actual ages of our patients that are buying from us? And this also kind of triggers marketing now. Like how can we do something a little different to even get in more younger patients? Because, right now we're not all that successful with that. And then the last part on this part that I love is upgrade interval. So this is again the amount of time it takes from the first time they bought hearing aids to the next time in years and days. So 4.6 years in this case. I always look at the individual providers again because some are going to be much different than others. And quite frankly, some of that could be luck, right? Someone comes in and they're just going to buy every 3 years, no matter, who the provider is. But a lot of it is actually the conversations you have when that person's coming back. We had a provider that we were observing that a patient asked how long do hearing aids last, and they said, well, they last. I've seen patients keep them 8 to 10 years, even longer than that, right? And so that maybe not be the messaging that we want to say to a patient, even though that could happen, right? We've seen that, but the reality is we want to try to at least introduce them to new technology, right? We know in a 3-year cycle, typically each manufacturer comes out with two different versions of hearing aids, right? So we're so much further along in technology at the 3-year point or the 4-year mark than where they were when they first purchased those. It's important to have those conversations. So again, what's the strategy for that? Do you have an out of warranty plan? Are you sending out letters? Are you trying to get those patients into the office? Are you having follow-up calls when you send out the letters? Or are you just sending the letters, crossing your fingers, and hope they call you and set up an appointment? When they come in, do you have demos of new technology that you can introduce to a patient so they can see what the differences are? And then if they choose not to purchase, do you have some sort of after warranty solution that potentially you can still offer them? But this number at 4.76, I'd say it's pretty good. ESCO did a study a number of years ago where they said the industry average was 5.4 years. I like to see that number at about 4.2 for our practice. Understanding people are going to take time, obviously, in different situations before they decide to purchase additional set of hearing aids. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is the hearing aid section. And so I love to look at units by manufacturer because I'm not an audiologist. So I love to ask audiologists why are you fitting this manufacturer or that manufacturer? With our 13 audiologists, it's kind of fascinating how different they are in the manufacturers that they actually fit. And I love that because they typically say, I felt like this one solution was the best for this patient because of A, B, or C, right? And I think that's super cool when you care for patients that way. The other thing we're going to look at is units by technology level, right? And so in this case, we have 54% premium and 16% advanced. So we have about 70% of our units premium or advanced. That's a pretty good number. I like to see it probably about 75% because what we know is patients in those two types of technology typically do better. The technology is better, so it performs better for them. There's less issues, there's less follow-up. They're typically happier patients. While knowing, there's budgetary constraints and things like that we have to be cognizant about and make sure we fit the right solution for the right patient. But it's always interesting to look at this. And then to me, the coolest part when I'm looking at all this is the actual COGS analysis. And so it breaks down your individual tech level. It'll tell you your average ASP for each of those, and then it'll tell you what your cost of goods sold per unit is. So when I looked at this, when I was doing some research, I looked at premium 2811. Great, they probably sell a set for $5,800, for their premium. But when we look at advanced, their advanced level is $1,054. So like this is a huge call out that something needs to change, right? Why so low? So I'm going to break down by the individual provider and understand, who has that low ASP. Or is it just a strategy that isn't implemented properly from a pricing standpoint, right? So like we like to have a $500 difference in ASP by technology level by individual hearing aid, so that it makes it easy for patients to make buying decisions between technology levels. But there's something dramatically wrong here. And then when you go over to this side and look at cost of goods sold by unit, we can see in this specific case, their cost of goods sold is more than what they're selling their actual hearing aids for. So they've lost $82,000 just out of cost of goods sold by having this going on. So, when we start looking at, what are we doing? Do we raise prices, to get out of that hole? Do we renegotiate with manufacturers? Do we consult with a buying group? Do we do more bulk buying potentially to get free units coming to us? But the key here is this 68% on cost of goods sold percentage. Um, and you can see how it changes by individual tech level. This number here should be about 35%. So they are way off on their pricing structure and or the amount of money they're spending on hearing aids. Um, and like this gets into my P&L analysis days quite a bit because a 62% cost of goods sold percentage gives you a 32% gross margin. Inversely, if it was at 35%, we'd have a 65% gross margin, right? So that's a nice starting point when we have to start paying all the rest of our bills. Typical expenses for a practice besides hearing aids are about 50%. So you look at your labor, which is maybe 25 to 30%, your marketing, maybe 8%. Practice like this, that's maybe 6 million is probably lower than that. But a new practice that's growing is going to spend a higher percent towards their revenue. Your rent maybe 7%, but it's all going to add up to about 50%. So if we're starting off with a 32% gross margin, and I know I have 50% more of my revenue to go to paying my expenses, I'm in a big hole right now that I need to figure out some solutions. So I really like to look at this because this number here is key to kind of focus on it being around 35%. So that's what I had, Chelsea. Thank you for allowing me to share, and I appreciate the time today.
Oh yeah, no. So much that I can learn, and I think a lot of people can learn from you and your wealth of experience. That was really great. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again here. Hope you guys can see it okay and introduce our final presenter, who is Leslie Pearson. She brings a unique mix of entrepreneurial spirit, operational discipline, and healthcare expertise to her role at Fuel Medical, where she works with ENT and audiology private practices across the nation to improve their performance, strengthen their culture, and support long-term growth. Before joining Fuel, Leslie spent 20 years building and operating a 10-location cocktail bar group in Portland. So she's got experience doing things outside the industry that play well in our industry, managing large teams, creating scalable systems, and using KPIs to stay profitable in all kinds of businesses. And that's really given her a deep understanding of data-driven leadership. She has a background in biology, certifications in otolaryngology practice management and change management, and hands-on experience across the medical field and our field specifically. She really enjoys helping practices integrate smart technology, streamline operations, and develop strong leaders at every level. So with that, I am going to turn it over to you, Leslie.
Thanks, Chelsea. Again, just really happy to be here. Thanks for having me. It's funny the small degrees of separation in this industry. 10 years ago, I was working with Jim when I was a tinnitus manufacturer rep when he was at Elite. So very honored to be here with these industry experts. And again, as Chelsea said, I'm Leslie Pearson. I'm the Senior Regional Manager with Fuel Medical. I'm a business advisor for our members in the Northeast and the Northwest parts of the country. And I help practices optimize operations and understand their numbers and really make decisions that drive growth. And one of the things we do really well at Fuel is helping practice leaders align their team performance with the goals of the business. And tools like MVP make that alignment so much easier. And so for my portion here, I'm going to take a little bit more of a consultant approach to how we use MVP to advise on setting goals and creating incentive plans for the practice, and also the impact that MVP has had on staff financial literacy and behavior. All right, that coming through okay? Great.
Looks great.
So this time of year, our team is deep in strategic planning mode, setting financial, operational, and marketing goals for the next year. And the first places that we go in with our MVP users, and even with our non-MVP users, because there's going to be a lot of good data here I show you that is helpful even for someone who's not using MVP. But we go to the goal setting page, the benchmarks and market share here to get some insights. So goal setting, is just looking back at, I'm looking at last year here for this ABC dummy clinic, but looking at where each location ended the year. and using that as just kind of a benchmark to set revenue goals for the next year, also taking into account any kind of staffing changes. The other thing I love here is just looking back at the 2025 forecast in the table view. So, um, a couple great ways that this is showcased, and going to take a second to load here, but I really love seeing the seasonality patterns. Obviously, this isn't a table view, but if we go back to that seasonality view, it's nice to be able to understand what's going on in different parts of the season. And our marketing teams love this view too. They love seeing the seasonality laid out so clearly to help them plan outreach campaigns or community events or even digital pushes during months when maybe opportunities naturally slow down. And so, typically without kind of having this seasonality view, we'd have to go in, put it in a spreadsheet, look at this the seasonality trends. It doesn't give you a really good graphical representation. So being able to see that is really, really helpful. And then being able to ask MVP to set that up when you do your goal setting, also really, really helpful for members. And for some markets, we can even use these for non-MVP users as a way to gauge what their seasonality is going to be. We also look at the benchmarks tab. So for, maybe newer or faster growing clinics that don't have a lot of historical data, being able to go in and look at these KPI benchmarks, which it's going to pop up in a moment, but basically it's going to use your practice's FTE status and give you some good benchmarking on what's the MVP data set compared to practice of your similar size. So this again is just kind of a gut check on, here's what we think some natural growth might be, or here's a 5 or 10% growth target, but where are we at compared to practices a similar size? So lots of different views here where you can look at average sale price and technology benchmarks, effectiveness like conversion benchmarks that Jim was talking about. So I really love to just consult this screen as well. And then market share insights. This is really unique to MVP. So the market share and the Medicare Advantage report are tools that are incredibly helpful for us when we're setting goals for maybe greenfield markets or evaluating a practice's competitive position. Sorry here, I'm a little slow to load, but I'm going to go ahead and use the zip code that Fuel headquarters is in, which is Camas, Washington. So, and again, this is the dummy clinic, so it's not going to show you percentage of market share, and that's because this dummy clinic doesn't have a clinic located in Camas, Washington. But in the market share tab here, we're able to look at in a 25-mile radius what's the 65 plus population, what's that percentage of 65 plus, and you can easily manipulate the chart to sort by highest value to lowest value. So just getting a good idea of where your patient customers lie is great, again, for newer clinics or patients with not a lot of historical data. And also what I think is helpful about this screen is it's giving you demographics, so average household income. That can be really important when we're talking about setting treatment plan pricing or fee schedule setting as well. And then the market details here is going to dive a little bit more into what your penetration rate. So again, if we had a clinic in this area, it's going to look at the market share and give us kind of penetration rate. So that again is really helpful for practices setting goals, but also for teams like ours that are looking at marketing activities or maybe direct mail campaigns. Which markets do we want to target? And so once we've kind of set the annual goals for each location, then the practice can just go back into the goals screen and schedule a goal strategy meeting right here with MVP. So I love this feature. And you can also, reschedule goal setting if you're reevaluating your goals after, let's say, like a really soft Q1, like we saw this year. So setting your goal strategies here is what is going to create all this conditional formatting that you see where there's red or gray or green, like Jim and Sarah have talked about before, where you're basically understanding whether you're on target. And this is really going to come into play when you're asking staff to look at their goals, right? Um, I've learned over the years, opening up a spreadsheet, most people are allergic to, especially the staff. So being able to see a really clear dashboard like this is helpful for them to know how they are to goals. Another area that once, like Jim and Sarah said, we usually live in this KPI center too when we are um, reviewing, month to date, quarter to date, year to date. So we live in this screen here. I've seen it really impactful for practices that even, pick the KPIs that are most important to achieving their initiatives. And then they even track some of those on a separate spreadsheet so they can see kind of changes month to month rather than toggling back and forth between screens. But like both Sarah and Jim mentioned, looking at these per clinic and per provider is really helpful and really unique to MVP. So we can drill down to get all those details per practice, per provider. But like everyone's mentioned before, another screen that I think is really helpful and very unique is looking at the scheduling insights. So looking at the patient flow screens here, um, these are some of my favorite features, and these aren't available in most office management systems, Counselor, Cycle, Blueprint, Suno. You can't get this information easily across those platforms and those dashboards. So looking at total appointments um, can help leaders spot whether follow-ups, routine visits, testing appointments are maybe consuming too much bandwidth. And it's an incredibly actionable way to diagnose bottlenecks or maybe provide insights around adding staff or standardizing follow-up protocols. And so these are really helpful areas that we spend a lot of time in when we're trying to make decisions around locations or to improve clinical efficiency. And again, drilling down by clinic, drilling down by provider. Um, in this example here, we're looking at utilization rate as a whole, but if we just start to look at, utilization rate, which is going to be the number of booked appointments divided by your capacity, you're going to get a really good idea of kind of what's happening at each location. And that'll help you align resources to each location. Another thing that was talked about today, really unique, is the total appointment calendar down here. I love that it is red and green per day, indicating whether you're on target. And like Jim said, we use this a lot to look at sales opportunity. Um, and so sales ops is one of the best leading indicators of success. And MVP will use historical data to predict exactly how many opportunities you need to hit your goals. This is normally a really time-consuming process that we still do on a spreadsheet for some of our members without MVP, calculating opportunities based on historical ASP and conversion rate and return rate. And so I love this here though, where we can look at the current month. We're in December for ABC Clinic, and we're in the Centerville location here. And we can have a real high level view of where we're at on target week by week to hit our revenue goals for the month based on opportunities here. And I love that, not only leaders can look at this, but patient care coordinators can check the schedule. And if they're light for the week, then they can adjust scheduling or outreach immediately. So, the team knows again exactly where to align their resources. And having this level of visibility into KPIs allows us to align performance with the goals that we set earlier. But I want to transition briefly into how we use the KPIs to inform incentive plans, because we help practices a lot design incentive plans, not just for providers based around hearing aid sales, but also for different roles within the audiology or ENT practice. And what I've learned over the 3 rules, or over the 3 years, sorry, what I've learned over 7 years of doing incentive planning for practices is really following 3 rules. And that is, define what success looks like for both the business, in both business and patient terms. So something like, when you hit your 10 opportunities per week, we can achieve a balanced schedule that supports revenue and patient demand. And then number two, use metrics that are easy for the staff to access. That's really where MVP comes into play. If it takes 4 hours to find and compile the data, then no one tracks it, and let alone no one analyzes it. And then review the metrics at the same frequency you expect the behavior to change. And so, MVP supports every one of those rules. So an example is, just last week I was working with a practice who is introducing a new support staff member. So a completely new role to the practice. They're an audiology private practice. They're introducing a hearing instrument specialist as a support staff role. They already have an audiology tech, or their patient care coordinator kind of act as that audiology tech. And so we wanted to design an incentive plan that had like clear productivity metrics and clear sales metrics. And so the first place we went was MVP, and we went actually into patient flow tab, because again, we're trying to look at metrics that we can access easily and we can analyze with the team frequently. And so we went in and looked at total appointments, for the clinic type, and looked at how many follow-up appointments based on per FTE this practice was doing, and set a reasonable goal for follow-up appointments for the hearing instrument specialist support staff. And then the other thing we did was go into KPI Center and look at, I think it's other KPIs. But we were looking at the number of upgrade units. Maybe that's in sales here. Yeah. So in sales in the KPI Center is the number of upgrade units. So again, we looked at, the location where the support staff would be working, what the average upgrade unit interval and number of units had been monthly, and then set some realistic targets based on how we felt that the hearing instrument specialist was going to be setting up patients during their repair and routine follow-up conversations, to get them interested in newer technology. And so we set those two goals. Those two goals will be really easy then for the leaders to pull up and manage with that new support staff. So all of this, the forecasting, the operational clarity, it only works when staff can engage with the data themselves. And that's really where I see MVP drive alignment, is when, the team sees what the leaders see, performance naturally starts to shift. And I think we've heard that across these testimonials with Jim and Sarah and their work with their teams too. So MVP is a lot like using a Fitbit. The more that you consistently check your steps or your sleep trends, the more you understand your own habits, and the easier it becomes to change them. And MVP works exactly that same way. When staff check their stats regularly, they start to see the business differently, and they connect their daily actions to outcomes, and they understand what drives the KPIs, not just what KPIs are. And I mentioned this practice before that actually goes into the KPI Center and tracks about 10 different metrics. And I'll kind of briefly show you what that, like a spreadsheet like that, looks like. But they might be looking at something like this where they're tracking it across the year. And this practice, like Sarah, has an unconventional fiscal year, so they're looking at different kind of three top KPIs, but they're tracking about 15 different KPIs here. And what they start to do is they start to notice how their behaviors change the KPIs. And so they gain this financial literacy, and they also change their behaviors around it. So to wrap up here, I know we're 2 minutes left. I'm continually impressed by the ways MVP really helps entire teams row in the same direction. And the customization, the clean visuals, the color-coded goals, it all gives leaders and staff the same clarity they need to make better decisions. And that's when sustained performance change really begins. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Leslie. I really appreciate it. We do have a couple questions here. I know we are close to time, so before I hop to the Q&A, which we're happy to stay on a couple minutes, I think, and answer a few questions. I did first of all just want to thank all of our presenters. That was incredibly helpful and interesting, even to me. So I can imagine our audience will feel the same way. One thing I want to mention really quick is it was funny as Jim was going through and mentioning some of the things that he likes to look at, especially in the KPI center around TPA patient attrition and average age at purchase and upgrade interval and things like that. I'm actually going to be presenting at a digital conference tomorrow called Hear World. I'm going to have Kate drop the link in the chat in case anyone's interested in attending, but I'm going to be talking about all three of those things, Jim, and a handful of other things, but looking more at the data set broadly. So it's really interesting to look at for your own practice down to your individual clinics and providers, like you were saying. It's also really interesting to look at across the entire data set. So if anyone's interested in learning more about some of those trends that we're seeing across practices in the industry, I'll be sharing more about that tomorrow. So Kate dropped the link if you guys want to register. It's a free conference happening tomorrow. Um, okay. I do have a screen popped up here for anybody who is an existing MVP user and saw something that they were interested in or curious about today or want to learn more. You guys know how to reach us at the support button at the top of MVP. We're happy to meet with you one-on-one to go through that. For anyone who attended who isn't an MVP user who would be interested in a more thorough demo of MVP and a conversation with us about whether it might be a good tool for their practice, you can scan the QR code here on the screen and set that up easily as well. Okay, with that, I do have two questions. So if anyone else has one, feel free to pop it in. Otherwise, we will answer these too. So the first one is, and this I think could be for any of you presenters. So feel free to chime in if you'd like. But the question is, what information do you find helpful to share with providers to drive them for better performance?
So I share quite a bit. I think the one thing I didn't talk about, which I think is really important, is opportunity value. And that is basically an equation that looks at for each individual provider, ASP, close rate, the inverse of the return rate, and their binaural rate. And that gives you those four main categories really give you a reflection of probably the overall performance of that individual provider, more so necessarily than revenue because it contributes more. But I like to spend 15 minutes going through, not as much as I did with y'all today, but going through probably 8 different main KPIs. And my thought is always, it doesn't matter where you are today, right? This is our baseline. This is what we're looking to improve. So if your conversion percentage is 42%, that's okay. Let's try to get it up to 45, then 50%. If your return rate is 7%, can we get it down to 5%, right? So using it as a baseline and making them feel comfortable that we're only trying to make improvements to help more patients, I think is part of the key to having those conversations.
Yeah, totally agree. That's great. Well, Leslie, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I'd add on to that too. Conversion rate and opportunities are two that, back to, I think Sarah said it, like they choose three initiatives. Like we choose three things to have um, staff really focus on. Beyond that, there's just too many metrics to follow. So really looking at, conversion rate, opportunities, ASP would be the three that we're usually focusing leaders on having their team review.
And I would say, I mean, there's obviously a lot of things, but I think being able to have an attainable goal for each office, so it becomes an office goal each month, it's a target, kind of like what Leslie was saying with the Fitbit tracker. We don't know what to do if we don't have a goal to set forward. So having it so it's readily visible and understanding what we're looking and what we've forecasted, I would say has been a really powerful tool for our company.
That's great. And actually, it's a nice segue because the other question that was asked was, um, how do you provide access to this data to your teams? So I think this person's wondering whether you give your team logins to MVP, whether you share it one-on-one or in team meetings. So I'd love to hear from any of you about how you and your practices have approached that.
Yeah, so with our audiologist, I just share my screen with them. They can see their own revenue and counselor, but all the other metrics, I just meet with them one-on-one with Dr. Johnson, and we just walk through the individual KPIs with them. Our marketing team does have full access because there's so much more cool stuff in there that they leverage and utilize. And then a couple of our team leaders also have access so they can better manage their individual clinics.
Great.
I could share that we share with them at team meetings as well. But what I do is I take the data, and at the beginning of every month, I send out the forecasts of what we've forecasted for that particular month, and we recap how they did the previous month, and then also where we're at in terms of percentage to goal for the fiscal year. And it's been really, really interesting to watch how 1 month can really change because it is a cumulative goal. And so to be able to show, like, wow, don't get discouraged. 1 month, we're looking at the whole picture. And I think it's really translated to power within the team. So,
That's great. Awesome.
Yeah, and I would find with my work with the practices that use MVP, there's a combination of both of those. There's, leaders just sharing screen or maybe capturing the, top KPIs they're looking at per location and per provider as a percentage to goal, and then sending that out ahead of like a team meeting to review.
Perfect. Yeah, I would say that definitely aligns with what we tend to see a huge variety. There's some folks who want everybody on their team to be able to see every last thing and monkey around in MVP all day. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where it's kind of like shared out from the top, either in one-on-ones or team meetings or whatever. So yeah, great. Lots of flexibility there. Okay, good. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending and staying over a few minutes with us if you're still here. And thanks again to you amazing presenters. That was awesome. And again, thanks everyone for being here. I hope you have a great rest of your day and we will see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.